Great to have you with us for another one of these. We've been doing a few of these now, so this isn't the first that we're doing. This one particularly is an interesting one around change and innovation. We'll get to that in a minute. But my name's Anthony, and I'm a client director here at Bailey and French. I'm joined, as always, by my colleague Claudia.
Hello. I am also a client director and business psychologist here at Bailey and French. It's awesome to have you all join us again, or for your first time potentially. So I hope we can enlighten you with some interesting perspectives on how we can shift from change to innovation.
Yeah, and this one's part of our psychological flexibility or human agility series. So you'll see a fair bit more on this topic. If you go to our events page, you'll see all the upcoming events that are there, but and more on that in a minute. But the questions that we were Claudia and I were talking about, well, how do we give you something a little bit different here? And clients are always going, well, we're getting stuck and no one's really making decisions and no one's stepping up. We need more visible leaders. We need people to take accountability, and we're good at talking, but not a lot of action. And I'm hoping that this kind of practical masterclass, webinar, whatever you want to call it, will give you a bit of an insight. I think that's fair to say, Claudia.
I think so, absolutely. So we kind of wanted to give you a little bit of a unique take, something that you maybe haven't heard before, but also something really practical. So I thought a good place to start was around perception. A lot of people recently have been saying that, it's just semantics, change is innovation, but that change is actually... well, change and innovation are not the same thing. So we'll start there, and then we'll kind of move into the conditions to help us shift from change to innovation as individuals, and from a team perspective and from an organizational perspective as well. And then we'll also close on the mindset for human agility, which underpins everything. So shall we get into it? So moving on, as Ant's already alluded to, we would love you to just, if you aren't already, just follow us on LinkedIn, sign up for our newsletter. We've got a YouTube channel with all of our recent webinars as well on there. So if you missed any different pieces on communication, on the psychology of motivation in times of change, and really ultimately a place to find out how you can create environments for human thriving in the workplace. QR code is up there as well, so really nice, useful resource for leaders to go through. And it's a guide on psychological flexibility, which has some really useful links and resources, videos, articles, etc. to support you and your organisation. So just have a little look at that, have a scan of that. I hope you find that useful. So should we get into it?
Let's get into it. Yeah, let's do that.
Okay. So I think, first of all, as Anne alluded to, we would like to start with a quick experiment. So in the chat, we would like you to describe the image that comes to your mind when you think of change. So you can share a GIF, you can maybe have a look at some emojis, talk us through what you think is change when it comes to mind. So the image that comes to mind when you think of change.
It's a tough one, isn't it? I kind of was doing this, but then I know some of the answers, and I won't ruin it for people, but it's an interesting one. And don't worry, we won't stay here forever. A waterfall. Ooh. Why does weather always come up? That's an interesting one.
Is that weather? I think that's just natural elements. I think that's continual movement. That's what I'm taking from that. There we go. Vicky's saying a constant. We've got a surprised face, or is it a scared face? Oh, I'm not sure which there. Frustration from Nicholas. Celebration. There we go from Megan.
Not Sarah, yes. One of my favourite gifts of all time.
That gets used a lot in our office, I have to say. Okay, and then we've got a whisking. Oh, okay. Is that like a recipe? Tracy, do you want to expand more on that one?
More on that one. That's cool. Yeah. I guess the point here, and interestingly, we asked ChatGPT this, right? And it came up with this image, which of course involves none of the nature, human, any of that kind of organic element to change. It's just about going from A to Z and probably back to square one at some point. And it doesn't really give too much. But actually, when you ask human beings their image of change, they do no one was as hilarious as what you've all been. But something to do with images around endings or disruption or weather metaphors, something around movement and uncertainty, but there's definitely more kind of fogginess or less focused images. This tends to be, and you can look at some of the research on this as well, it's quite interesting. Even the emotional color palette tends to be slightly more heavy or darker tones, reflecting the uncertainty that comes from it. And it's quite interesting when you do it the other way, where you start to look at innovation. Go on, Claudia.
Absolutely. So what about innovation, guys? We'd like you to do the same thing, but for innovation. So you can either describe an image, use a GIF again, emoji, whatever you want to describe the image that comes to mind when you think of innovation.
I'm expecting some good ones because the last load of GIFs were really good.
I like that GIF for the brain.
Yeah, that's good.
The colourful brain and lots of things going on inside of it. Fresh new improvement, bright, exciting. Oh, riding the wave. Okay. That tells a lot of skill.
It's trending.
I think about this a lot. Okay.
Hey, Claudia, your idea of involving GIFs was a perfect idea. I think that's a brilliant use of innovation there.
I know if anyone who's watching this on YouTube, that should just encourage you to come to the live one, because you probably won't be able to see the GIFs, the wonderful entertainment and the bringing to life of what innovation and what change really looks like from everyone's perspective. So, oh, lovely. Melanie's got some. Oh, I wonder what prompts are coming into these. I'd be curious to know, to come up with these wonderful images.
Well, this is it, right? And again, this is just a very positive. It's a positive starter, right? There's no depth to this other than the fact that change and innovation, although on the face of it should be the same thing. We're all going through change, we're all innovating, we're all changing. It's the same thing. It really isn't. So when we start to talk about going through change in our organization, we probably need to start flipping our language around change and start to be thinking about innovation and doing it more positively. When just to keep some consistency, when human beings tend to do this, as you have done, colors tend to be lighter. There's a lot of light bulbs or sparks, fireworks. There tends to be something to do with rockets or growth or development, nature sprouting, and there's a lot of that in what you've just put. But just generally, that emotional color palette does tend to be brighter, lighter, and associated with energy. And I think that's a really interesting thing, right? Because what we're saying here is even the word change is going to bring some emotional and neurological kind of baggage to the conversation. It's going to create deep-rooted resistance and habits which are really difficult to overcome and shape. So then when you tap into a normal organizational structure that kind of rewards stability, especially in a lot of hierarchies or different processes and structures and systems or politics or whatever environment that you're in, stability tends to be rewarded or reinforced in some way. And that's what makes change so difficult. On top of that, moving to innovation is really tricky because we don't like to kind of fail. We innately fear the potential of doing something wrong because it has such potential social ramifications. It might knock on my confidence, my self-belief, but also usually leadership is pretty misaligned on what innovation and the direction is. That changes quite frequently, and there's bureaucracy there. Or I just don't have the energy. I'm just burnt out. I am fatigued, I'm disengaged, and that's what creates changing from that state of change to innovation so difficult, which is, it's an interesting one. And those of you that want to look at it a little bit more, there is a really great book that's just been launched on this, The Unaccountability Machine, Why Big Systems Make Terrible Decisions. It's by Dan Davies. Have a little read, and it explains a lot of these reinforced habits and behaviors and systems in our organizations that stop us from being as innovative and creative as possible.
And I've just popped that in the chat for anyone as well who is keen to, who didn't manage to take that. So have a little look at that. So we also, obviously, for consistency, we asked ChatGPT what innovation looks like in images, and it's pretty much exactly what Ant just described there. So, the light bulb there, the energy, the rockets, the systems, and the arrows. So, I think that kind of depicts a little bit around what innovation is associated with. But I think we need to come around to the point that, naturally human beings really do actually crave that newness and innovation. So that's how we've adapted over time. And that's what makes us brilliant. So that kind of begs the question, why are we so afraid of change? Because interestingly, new things can come about that we absolutely love and adopt. And I think it's all around understanding that as human beings, we are explorers, we're adventurers. And so, from that becomes new thinking and different ideas. If we think about some examples, for example, let's talk about good old Netflix. I'm sure pretty much everyone here has a subscription, but, Netflix very much started from doing DVD rentals, saw that was declining. Broadband adoption was rising at that time, and essentially they shifted from mailing the DVDs to on-demand streaming, and then built to do original content. That was a real change and a shift, but was very much driven by innovation and created an entirely new model for entertainment across the world, as we've all seen, with many streaming platforms coming out about now. Even things like, the change from energy, I guess, from cars. So let's talk about like Tesla, for example. So they had a need to reduce reliance on fossil fuels and obviously grid instability, that kind of thing. The innovation came around to obviously build electric cars, and the outcome was massive accelerated EV adoption, and ultimately has created a huge new wave for the better for our sustainability generally. So innovation doesn't usually start in a vacuum. It's normally triggered by market disruption, as we see constant tech shifts, consumer behavior changes, things like crises, a pandemic, and regulatory and environmental pressures as well. But not only that, internal strategic pivots as well, when old models stop working, which is going on all the time. We see on average, we used to see 2 to 3 changes a year. Now we see on average 9 a year. So how do we actually play on our natural strengths to adapt? So I think, we can also draw upon some pieces around neurodivergence as well. I think there's a lot of neurodivergent individuals seek that dopamine from newness, and it's all about having diversity in general. Just generally means more perspectives, and we have greater diversity of thought. And ultimately, I think we just need to lean on that strength and know that we have that within ourselves to be able to adapt.
Yeah, it's a really good point around why is it that human beings are so good at innovation, arguably the best species that's ever existed to innovate. And we love new things, like that's a fact. So then why is it so tricky? And some, just sort of looking at some of the latest research on this, is really, really interesting, because what we're able to start to look at is, well, what data is shared? What conversations are going on? The more that AI and data becomes part of our normal life, the research gets more and more interesting into this area of how we actually interact together. Those of you who might have seen previous ones or know our work here at Bailey and French, you will probably find this graph familiar. It is taken from our interpretation of work from the likes of kind of Keith Sawyer's Group Genius, the Jeff Van der Hoot's work on Team Flow, and colleagues, of course. But ultimately what we've done is looked at the murmuration of starlings, that nature, what comes to those things that already exist and are brilliant in our world, and how do we apply that to human behavior? And what's really interesting when you look at the research in this, and some of the later research, which is also included in digital and hybrid environments. So this isn't just about face-to-face interactions and kind of how we interact together in person, but just organizationally and in teams. These are some of the really important structures that have to exist for us to be able to create a competitive advantage from our innate human need for innovation and collaboration. So just very quickly, if you want some more insight into our team flow stuff, you'll have to get in touch, because we don't talk about that too much here. But just so that those of you who haven't seen it, the first part there on the left is all around separation. It's about, I have a kind of safe space to operate in, I have a clear role, and I'm really clear on what my strengths are to play that role to the best of my ability. There's a bit of psychological safety, but there's actual space and physical space to lean into there. And then, of course, direction, that alignment, that is purposeful, and that is not just about the organization's values or objectives and things that they want to achieve, but also us as a team having a very good understanding of where each other want to be in the next 3 months, 6 months, and having those conversations. And of course, the only way to do that is to create that level of trust and connection. So if I'm not going in the right direction, how are we giving feedback? Or if something's changed, how are maybe have that conversation which brings you back in? And how are we leveraging the different platforms across our organization, whether that's Microsoft Teams or whether that's an in-person meeting on a Monday morning? What are these opportunities to create trust and cohesion despite continuous change? So these are some of the kind of prime conditions to create human agility and innovation. And what's really interesting when you dig a little bit deeper into the research is really looking, and I guess every organization is looking at, well, what skills can I put into our plan to create these conditions for teams and leaders? Because this doesn't happen, unlike traditional flow, where it's normally just about the individual. If I've got strengths and I've got good challenge, then I can experience a state of flow. Time goes by, I feel like I'm in my peak, I'm in my zone. Whereas team flow is very, very different and very difficult, and it relies on individuals, it relies on teams and leaders. So there's a few skills here, but just to kind of name a few that keep coming up in the research that are critical to your, everyone's talking about skills-based organizations. Well, if we don't put skill development plans in place for these things, team flow and this human collaboration won't happen. And so emotional and cultural intelligence, of course, and that ability for individuals to self-manage and self-regulate their emotions, also self-manage in terms of time and attention. These things take a little bit of discipline. So innovation does not happen without some form of emotional intelligence and some element of self-regulation and discipline. As a team, because those things you can learn in isolation a bit. You can get better at time management skills. You can understand your strengths. Emotional intelligence, you can understand the premise. But when it comes to team and collective skills, you kind of have to learn that as a team. How do we solve a problem? When we look at values-based organizations and behaviors, and I know a lot of organizations are talking about cementing or refreshing their values because it's all about resetting the standards of leadership behaviors. Joint problem solving and applying those new values is critical. So how much time are we giving people in their day-to-day operations to be able to learn this skill as a team or as a project team or as a group collective? These are really, really important. And that boundary setting and conflict management, how do we overcome these things? I'm just written a piece actually on when values don't necessarily line up. And how do we have that conversation around how do we reprioritize those values together? Because I have to respect your values, you have to respect mine. So how do we have that conversation? And then finally, how do leaders actually create the safe, purposeful, meaningful, engaged culture that makes these other skills relevant? Because if you don't have that, you're going to have a very stifled kind of workforce that doesn't particularly want to learn these skills or doesn't want to implement these skills because senior leadership aren't doing it. So it all comes to the forefront. But I think, Claudia, you've got some insight into, well, what do we do with that and how have we done it? And give us a bit of an oversight of that.
Absolutely. So I think, you might be looking at the previous slides thinking that sounds great, but in reality, how do we actually create these conditions, and how do we drive that skill development? Well, this is kind of where Bailey and French come in. And we've actually created a series of workshops and learning pathways for teams and organizations all around these skills to really help facilitate that innovation, create that psychological flexibility and safety to understand that you can innovate, you can feel safe to bounce those ideas around. So for individuals, we give them a framework around psychological flexibility. So that's about understanding that you can accelerating acceptance of change and enabling them to adapt that much more. Well, that human agility, as we keep kind of coining, and also creating the environment to drive social imagination. So giving them the skills and the environment to stimulate things like storytelling and the ability to bounce ideas and have that confidence to influence stakeholders within the organizations. And then from a team perspective, through coaching, but also I think you kind of already touched on it a little bit around the separation. So understanding, how do they contribute individually and creating that skill to have that confidence to bring those ideas to the table, aligning with others and understanding how you can lean on others' strengths to build on those ideas to create those innovative ideas, and cohesion. So just making that all happen together as a team. And then also through our leadership program. So our human leadership program is all around setting the tone for innovation. So, understanding that you need to be role modeling behaviors to be authentic, inclusive, so understanding everyone's diverse thoughts and perspectives to help drive innovation. Diversity of thought often leads statistically to a lot more innovation, and overarchingly better performance and profit. So that's why inclusivity is such a key part, but also human connection and understanding the individual strengths in the team to help lead the team more effectively to drive that innovation. So we've got a series of things. So if you are looking to create that kind of environment and that culture within the organization, we have various programs that we can discuss to help support you on your way to innovation. Okay, so and I think you had a little bit more to add.
Yeah, I did. And I suppose the other thing is almost, we know that Bailey and French have a plethora of things that you can come and contact us about and talk about. But just generally, if you're thinking about embedding this in your organization, you're going, where do I start? And it's really tough because change is constant and we're doing loads, and where would this fit into something I'm already doing? People are being quite creative with their existing leadership programs, their onboarding, just any place that you can start to create a bit of a different understanding of innovation, what it means here, how do we tie it to personal values and motivations. A lot of people are thinking about April already. Surprise. There's a lot of kind of performance management processes being reshuffled and rejigged ahead of the new year, and people are starting to go, well, how are we going to start to implement some of these changes and build these change champions or catalysts? What does our leadership program need to look like for next year to start getting people to think in a slightly more pacey and innovative way? So there's a whole bunch of really creative ways to make this happen. I think the important thing is that you're focusing on the individuals and their ability to innovate, and no matter what systemic kind of environment they're in, how do they start to be a part of leading that team flow environment? And then also, how do we create that environment as leaders and coaches? None of this, though, kind of works without some element of psychological flexibility. Claudia mentioned something which we mentioned in the last chat, the last webinar session, which was about how can we do anything if we're already experiencing 9 different significant pieces of change every year when we're used to 2, which was probably too much anyway. And human agility, or the ability to build psychological flexibility, and how we define that is kind of your capacity, your ability to not just accept change, but be able to move with it positively. We're not telling people to just accept any change that's around the corner, it might be really disruptive, but how are you going to mentally overcome that to start to think about innovation and not get stuck in the change? So do have a little look at the QR code, download the resource, because it will talk a little bit more about what that is. But Claudia, Mike, I think you've got a poll to see what our human agility is like.
We sure do. So this is to test everyone to see what your human agility is like. So you will have a poll shortly pop up on the screen. Just a rating scale. So 1 to 5 stars. How much do you agree with that statement? 5 being strongly agree, 1 being not, obviously. So I accept uncomfortable feelings as part of life. I see my thoughts as just thoughts, not facts I must follow. Thirdly, I stay present and focused even when my life gets stressful. 4, I take action based on a balance between my values and organizational needs.
It's interesting seeing the results come through.
Yeah, and then I take small steps forward even when I don't have all the answers.
And this is an activity that you can run with your team, just generally. And it's interesting to have a discussion about some of the answers and the principles. I mean, that might be a good place to start. Obviously, then Bailey and French have the conversation mats and the skill development workshops or tailored versions of these. But I accept uncontrolled. It seems like we've got quite a humanly agile. Is that the word? A psychologically flexible group.
We've got 4.4 for the first is an average, 3.8, 3.1 for the third question, which is I stay present and focused even when life gets stressful. So that's one which obviously takes people off course if they're feeling stressed, which will probably lead to less productivity. That's why we need to build those skills around psychological flexibility so that you can be agile and adapt even when life is stressful, and you can still get things done. I have action based on a balance between my values and organizational needs. That was 4. Nice. Okay, yeah. Overall, it's looking pretty strong. We've got 3.8 to 4s as an average. So we've got an agile group, but there's still a bit of room to be done. So if you do need some support, you know where to find us.
And it's interesting, right? So these mindset shifts don't happen overnight. So if you're running this with a senior leadership team or as alongside an existing leadership program where you're trying to just break the traditional ways of doing things, maybe refresh values, and you're trying to get them to shift into different mindset, psychological flexibility doesn't happen overnight, but it is something that you can practice, right? So adopt a growth mindset into this. It does get better with practice. It's like a muscle. And it's not necessarily about, again, it's not telling people that they must just accept change. This is about creating the opportunity to be open to innovation. It's also about creating capacity for innovation because we're dealing with so much. So increasing our human agility and our psychological flexibility just is about giving us a choice of how we respond, how we act, how we then are able to do those 3 kind of key conditions. It's almost how do we, Alex talks about this a lot. How do we keep our human being switched on? Because if we do that, we know that human beings are brilliant at innovation quite naturally. But over to you, Claudia, to close us off. I'll stop talking.
So we'd just like to ask you a couple of questions, have a bit of a think, and think about how can we apply this to upcoming changes that we know about? How can we apply this to upcoming changes that we don't yet know about? So really thinking about everything that we kind of covered. How can you apply that human agility to pieces that you need? Okay, has anyone got any questions around that? Maybe they're thinking some practical examples where maybe we could add some insights, some support on. There we go. Denise, create safe spaces, be deliberate about connecting. Love that. Would anyone else like to share how we can apply human agility learning to any upcoming changes? maybe talking about the team alignment, things like
creating and being deliberate, I think, is quite interesting, because when you look at this, it doesn't happen naturally. The mindset and the human ability to innovate comes naturally, but these are very specific conditions to create that take a little bit of discipline and a little bit of self-management, right? It's tough.
Definitely. We've got Vicky here. Be open and honest about how it can feel different for everyone differently. Absolutely. Everyone has different perspectives on how they feel about change. And it might even come down to things that they've experienced on a personal. Some people really value stability. Some people really value that innovation. Maybe it's about understanding different people's perspectives, talking about it, communicating effectively, to understand how you can play on other people's strengths to help people feel a bit safer. Got Fiona here. Begin to change the culture to embed this thinking. Okay. Yeah. And how are you going to do that, Fiona? That's what I want to know. Tell me how you're seeing this from Denise. Yeah, really like that. Just asking the question is just a really nice first step to understand how people are feeling, know that you acknowledge them and how they're feeling. We've got promote collaboration and communication. Yeah, absolutely. Brilliant.
It's really interesting as well when you do run through some of this thinking with different clients, seeing where they're already strong rather than trying to start with where they're weak is just a natural, more positive, appreciative inquiry approach to doing this. So where do we see innovation? Where are we seeing great minds? Claudia, I think we should do a whole different one on neurodivergence and the link between ideas and kind of the link between brilliant different thoughts and how we channel that. I think if you've got a diverse different way of thinking, whether that's a team or an organization or culture, this kind of conditions and these ways of thinking, but especially if we're then training coaches or change enablers or whatever you're going to call them to be able to facilitate some of that brilliant culture change, I think that's super powerful.
Absolutely. And even that's just made me think about when I worked a lot within the tech sector, they're doing hackathons. So where, how can we break things to make it seem easier? How can we enable change for innovation? And that's the whole ethos behind it. Even think about how you can do a hackathon individually with your teams with a particular project or issue that you're having at the moment, things like that. That could really help. And we've got Fiona again. Oh, Sarah, I like to keep taking a bit small step forward. Baby steps, still a progress. Absolutely. Put one foot in front of the other, as they say. Fiona, leaders need to have buy-in and understanding and get staff involved. That's incredibly critical. Absolutely.
Yeah. Done some really good stuff recently where we're getting senior leaders and some of the exec team either on a podcast or just sharing their ideas on a panel as part of a program. And we're obviously, because it's Bailey and French, we're kind of injecting some of these specific questions around these specific topics, but the stories that they're able to tell around human agility and around the ability to create team flow, even though they don't necessarily even need to know the science and the language behind it, they're just brilliant stories that kind of create that safety and that culture to go out there and do and try. And this is progress. And if it's progress, it doesn't need to be perfect. And so that often is a hindrance to innovation, right?
Mm-hmm, absolutely. So does anyone have any questions at this point? We would love to take any questions for how things can be applied. Feel free to share. But don't forget to scan your go-to resource on human agility here as well.
I mean, if that is everything, we've covered so much so quickly. Please feel free to kind of stay on and ask your questions, or contact us directly. More than happy if you want us to share some of this in your next HR meeting, or to share it with senior leaders, or you want us to come in and demo some of the stuff around the human agility, or whatever you think is the next step that works for you. More than happy to do that. But we'll stay on, answer a few more questions. Think about your commitments. It's always good to walk away with some specific actions. And make a note, actually. So on the 22nd of October is our next masterclass session. Mike put it in the chat earlier, right at the top. But that is going to be an interesting one, and specifically more around strategic HR. So that is going to be an interesting topic as well. All of them are interesting topics.
Exactly. Even if you want to brainstorm, feel free to add us on LinkedIn, send us a message, send through an inquiry via the website, baileyandfrench.com. There you go. You've got the next upcoming webinar in the chat now, so you can register for the next one as well. And feel free to ask us any questions offline if you feel more comfortable doing that way as well. We'll be more than happy to help and support in any way we can.
Yeah, we'll stay on. I'm just flicking back through the slides just in case you're taking notes and want to see some of those notes. But of course, it's all available on YouTube if you want to watch the recording. Those who are watching the recording, you missed some great gifts at the beginning.
So next time you should sign up to join in person. And here's the link for our upcoming event series as well. Thanks so much, everyone, for joining.